Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined today by Don Nosey. He is the President Emeritus of the Go for Broke National Education Center, which is what, sir?
It's a organization that actually is trying to make, I guess, a story about Americans who were treated unjustly and expose it to the world and make Americans realize that this story could happen to anybody, and it could happen to any American.
And that group that you're referencing are Japanese Americans during World War II.
Correct. Japanese American soldiers of World War II.
Soldiers, but also generally.
General public as well.
But tell us about the Japanese American soldier and how they were treated as other during the Second World War.
So interestingly enough, their families were incarcerated in camps immediately following or shortly after the World War II. They were wholesale 120,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast were issued Executive Order 9066, which meant that they had to be relocated from the West Coast to interior incarceration camps set up by the government.
Including your mother?
Including my mother, yes. However, the U.S. government at some juncture decided, hey, here's a group of people that we could potentially ask to serve their country, despite incarcerating their families.
It's laughable. It's laughable that these young men of Japanese descent are in these camps, and then the American government approaches them and says, we'll let you out of the camp if you fight for us against the Japanese, yet we're classifying you as somehow affiliated with our enemy, the Japanese.
Yeah, when you look at it that way, it is kind of a puzzling dilemma, isn't it? And that's a puzzling dilemma that these young men that were 18, 19 all faced, because they were approached by the government to say, gee, we now would like to see if you would like to serve your country.
But here's what's even more insane. If Japanese Americans are suspect and spies, why would you want them in your military?
Well, that's another good dilemma, because I think first and foremost is they view themselves as Americans.
No, I get it.
Yes.
But if you're the military leader, why would you want these people in your midst if you think they're spies?
I think there were examples, particularly in Hawaii, of a group called the Varsity Victory Volunteers, of gentlemen that actually had volunteered, even though they were part of the Hawaiian Territorial Guard. And as soon as Japan bombed Hawaii, they were essentially pushed out of they were asked to turn in their arms. But these gentlemen decided, you know what, we're still going to try and do some things to help the American effort. And they volunteered for different projects.
It's really amazing.
So I think the government saw this group of loyal Americans saying, you know, despite this bad treatment, despite our neighbors looking upon us as the enemy, we still want to show that we're loyal to this country. And I think it was that model that then convinced the government to say, you know, there's a group of pretty loyal Americans here.
But how did they know if they were loyal? I mean, in their warped thinking, how did they know if they were loyal?
I guess.
And I will say, and that's what you uncover in an exhibit that is currently on display called Defining Courage. Where is the exhibit, sir?
It's going to be in downtown Little Tokyo in a historic building called the Nishi Hongonji Temple, which was the original and first and largest Buddhist temple in America, and it was in Los Angeles. So that's where the exhibit's going to be. And we do explore this entire story. And it starts out with people entering our interpretive center to music and sounds of essentially 1940. And that day is no different than any other day. But it's actually the sounds that you would have heard people saying, hey, I'm going to go to church today. Hey, we're going to go play baseball. But you immediately enter the first room, which really puts the context of this entire story, and it's the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And we take people through that actual experience and saying their lives after that were changed forever. And from that, we then go in and show a number of things that essentially we're trying to create in terms of the minds of the people. That next was they had to pick up everything they owned and within 48 hours sell things, and had 2 suitcases. So that's what you're allowed to take with you to the incarceration
center. And sell at bargain basement prices, suffice it to say.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you a story. My grandfather to this day had a store, and for years kept writing the government, could you please tell me about where the contents of my safe are? letter after letter after letter. And eventually they wore him out and they never answered him. But those are the types of things where their possessions were just displaced, sold for cents on the dollar, and maybe they got some of the compensation back for it. But we're talking about all of their worldly possessions.
I want to ask you, please.
Sure. And then from there we move on to essentially talk about this story in terms of how it moves forward.
Right.
And so you take this great injustice to American citizens, and we then try and teach people about what do you do next. Mm-hmm. And we have a really interesting exhibit called Piece It Together. And we talk about all the decisions that face these incarcerated Japanese Americans and discriminated Americans. Things like, do you serve your country that has now done this great social injustice? And if you do serve, what happens to you as a result of these decisions you're making? So what we're trying to show young people is, and young Americans, is the decisions you make today could profoundly impact the rest of your life. And it did with these Japanese American World War II soldiers.
I want to see if we can juxtapose what's happening to Muslim Americans today with Japanese Americans.
Sure.
Without getting overtly political, without taking sides in the presidential race, it is clear that one presidential candidate, Donald Trump, is seeking to prevent Muslims from visiting this nation. There have been suggestions of tracking Muslims. I don't know if he's talking about roundups, but definitely tracking. What do you make of this, sir?
You know, for me, it's really sad social commentary today, because I think essentially, to me, it means that America has not learned any lessons about, treating Americans, in an unjust manner. I mean, I think it really says that we as a nation haven't learned the lessons of incarcerating or discriminating against specific populations of America.
I read an article recently, and in 1938, Americans were asked, should we allow German Jews into this country to flee persecution?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And 2-1, the response was no, and the reason given is they could be German spies. So today, Americans have been asked, should we allow Muslims to immigrate to this country from Syria, from Iraq? And 2-1, the answer is no.
Correct.
And the reason is they could be ISIS operatives. I mean, one could easily make the connection between Jewish German spies, the ISIS operatives of the day.
Correct.
I mean, the parallel seems valid.
Right.
Or does it?
It's totally valid, I think, in terms of those parallels. Mm-hmm. And therein lies what we're trying to achieve with our new interpretive center. We're trying to have people look at a time in history, and look at contemporary issues today and say, it needs to be different. The model needs to be different. The way the government and the way people view these issues need to be different. And it really needs to be back to our founding principles of democracy, which is equality for all people.
Are we at risk of spilling the melting pot over? I mean, are we no longer the melting pot that was a source of pride for Americans during the 20th century?
You know, that's a really good question. And I think, again, what we're going to try and have a dialogue about is just this question. You know, we plan on having a couple of documentaries soon.
Right.
Menendez versus Westminster.
Right, which is the precursor to Brown versus Board of Education.
Exactly.
Desegregating schools for Latino students here in California.
The other one is Voices in Exile.
Right.
Which is a story about, actually, the longest deportation case, which essentially targeted
the LA-8.
The LA-8.
Right, which was Palestinians accused of subversive behavior. I want to thank you for joining us, and I'd love to have you back. Again, the exhibit is being held in Little Tokyo. It's called Defining Courage. I urge you to go see it. His name is Don Nose. He's the President Emeritus of the Go for Broke National Education Center. I'm Brad Pomerance, Charter Local Edition.